Thank you all for coming. We're going to assemble a panel now, and I will introduce the panel members to you, and we expect that they'll give you a little bit of their experience, and then you'll be able to ask questions. There will be a microphone out there, so if you just be patient till John can bring you the microphone and ask your question or make your comment. Panelists, you want to make your way up here? Please. And as soon as you can see them, I will introduce them. They will include two of my students at Brattleboro Union High School who have nothing to do with the Vietnam War. I will assure you, however, that both go to a high school in Brattleboro, a public high school that has a lot more about the Vietnam War than 2 chapters in a textbook. They're both activists in their own way and have participated in and even organized some rallies, one of which was at Brattleboro Union High School last spring and received coverage in the local press. They are Lucia Mori and Eliza Price, here behind me. Far to the right is Bob Schmidt, a Vietnam War veteran, who today and for several years has been part of the Veterans Education Project in Amherst, Massachusetts. He also was a counselor at Brattleboro Union High School and a good friend of mine. Dr. Tom Hoskins is seated down in the end. He's spoken in my classroom as well. And despite protestations to the contrary, is quite articulate. Julie Forsyth, next to him, was a nurse. Dr. Tom was a doctor in Vietnam. And they were working with the Quaker organization, and when the Americans came home after the departure of the last helicopter on the 30th of April 1975, they stayed for a few months beyond that, which I never really could understand until they explained it. I was too naive. Dr. Bob Tortolani, recently retired from his local practice here, is also a Vietnam War veteran who has graciously accepted my invitation to come. So thank you all. I think I have everybody. And I invited the high school students for the experience, really, of being part of this. They represent the 21st century. And if you did have a question for them relative to what they learned about the war, and if it has any meaning today, they would be the ones to ask about that. So, we'll start down on the far end with you, Dr. Tom, if you don't mind. Microphone up here, and again, if you have a question, even right away, go ahead and ask it.
Do you mind just kind of asking people how many, show of hand, how many, how many protesters?
How many veterans of the war here with us tonight? Thank you. By the way, as Tom's assembling his thoughts, I joined the Community Council of Vermont Public Television a few years ago at the request of Chuck Miser, and he said, what can we do to help your community more? And I said, you know, in Brattleboro, you're thought of as Northern Vermont Public Television. There's nothing here, but look at this tonight. Now I'm the president of the Community Council of Vermont Public Television, so you do have an ear, you do have a mouthpiece there. If you'd like to see more of these kinds of things, let me know. And I was foolish enough to put my phone number in the press releases that went out, so you've got my number in probably more ways than one. Dr. Tom.
Thank you, Bill. Good to see folks and so many friends. And one of the things I urge Bill to do is to include the young people, because putting some of us old waxworks up here is not necessarily going to carry forward what is so necessary, which is the lessons of past tragedies and how can we prevent them in the future. This war is still going on. The Vietnam War is still going on for many. I'm retired now, so as in Vermont, what you do when you're retired, you get another job, and I'm working at the Brattleboro retreat. A co-worker of mine, a very dear friend, their partner is in the final throes of agony of disease felt to be caused by Agent Orange, as he was a service man there. And so it continues to affect physically the people in our nation, and you can imagine that's also the case within Vietnam, and emotionally as well. And the only message I have to share is one that as we as a nation go forward into further and future military adventures, is that we think very cautiously. What are we doing? What are we condemning people to in our actions? And do we know what's going on? Now, I'm glad I have this opportunity. I have the one resource I would really urge people to think about for your children, your grandchildren, is a book on Vietnam that came out in 1965, really written in 1964, right in the early days before the huge numbers of Americans got there. And David Halberstam, The Making of a Quagmire, 1965. Now the reason being that he points out in this book all of the pitfalls that we had continued to fall into for the 10 years following this, including what Julie and I saw there. And I urge folks to read this simply as that there are those who know early on what problems are and what to look out for. David Halberstam he described himself as a hawk. He wanted the American side to win, but he realized that given our approach from top down, that we could not win. I want to celebrate the men and women volunteers like myself and of the military who spent time in Vietnam, and also celebrate the people here who worked so hard to correct it's very sad shifts in directions that we have taken in the past. And I would like to say may they not be repeated, but let's just say, may we stay vigilant.
My name is Julie Forsythe, and I was in Vietnam from early 1973, just before the U.S. military withdrew, until late 1975, after the change of government. And as Bill said in the introduction, I was there, as I am today, as a Quaker. Having grown up in a strong tradition that really just doesn't hold with violence as being a very good solution to anything. I was a very active participant in the protest movements, and I wonder, there were two questions Bill was going to ask, and he only asked one. One was how many of you were vets. How many of you are old enough to have been involved in protests to the Vietnam War? The country was split, and as one who really believes so deeply that communication and connection is the way to move forward in community, this was a really hard time. It was not really particularly a time of dialogue. We were so divided against each other, against our generations, those who were older than we were, who just didn't see it the way we did, between us and those who followed the rules and joined the military. And I just want to say how delighted I am by this film. I was really apprehensive. Things like this always stir up so much mud. And this, to me, seems to be a pretty complete view. The view I was concerned about in going to Vietnam is what I kind of called the worm's eye view, which was what was it like for peasants, for children, for people who were the innocent victims. And that's what we were doing in Quang Ai. We were working in a rehab center, making arms and legs, and working with burn victims from napalm and so on and so forth. I was really taken by a number of expressions in this that said, war is just ghastly and agony, and I think that's our common ground. That's what we share with one another, no matter where we stood in all this, and really wanting to see that it just doesn't happen again. And of course, the announcements about Afghanistan right now are kind of painful and challenging. So here we are, and thank you, Ken Burns, for this, and thanks for a chance to talk about this and to really kind of stay awake to it all and not just paper it over and try and throw it away, because we can't. It's part of our lives.
My name is Robert Schmidt. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was in Vietnam from July '68 to June '69 with the 5th Infantry Division, 1st Brigade of the 5th Infantry Division at Quang Tri Dang Ha. I've been to Can Tien, actually. Wasn't fun being there, but I was there, well, for a very short time. But anyhow, yeah, I mean, I think about Vietnam every day. It never leaves my mind, my soul. I mean, it does for periods of time, but, and I think about the North Vietnamese soldier who survived, the guy with the beautiful blonde hair, gray hair, I wish I had it myself, but anyhow, saying there are no winners and no losers in war, and that's absolutely true. I mean, what happens, I mean, I developed, a couple of years ago, I had a heart attack, and there's no history of heart disease in my family, and I exercise every day, I eat a really careful diet, I don't smoke, and blah, blah, blah. I'm kind of a stress case, but, and it surprised the hell out of me and everybody around me, and I'm now getting compensation from the VA because of Agent Orange, because it's ischemic heart disease is directly related to exposure to Agent Orange, and I was definitely exposed to it, as were thousands of other young men, American men, and also Vietnamese, and children, and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, wars go on and on for years. And I mean, I used to be a history teacher long ago, and you know, the textbook there, the Vietnam War was from, started in 1962 to 1975, and you know, and it's all over. Well, it's not all over, that's the problem. The wars have long arms and they go on forever. The other thing, I'm also involved a lot with the VA hospital in Leeds, in Northampton, and you know, there's a huge number of young men coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and young men and women for that matter, who have PTSD, as I do myself. And you know, we are very blasé sometimes in America about going to war, and we have obviously a president who dodged the draft, and I think everybody knows that. He was a privileged man, young man, like a lot of other middle-class young men who were able to get out of service because you know, they got a letter from a doctor or a sympathetic doctor and blah, blah, and that sort of thing. And so, you know, some Americans, many Americans, I think, don't have much experience with war, and so there's a lot of, you know, let's just bomb the hell out of them. You know, that'll solve the problems. And those of us who directly experience war know that, you know, first of all, it doesn't solve anything, and second of all, it's, you know, when you bomb people and kill their children, they hate you forever. And so, you know, my heart continues. I mean, I'm pretty healthy, so I'm actually fine. But I mean, my heart aches for my friends. Who I have many veteran friends, many of whom are ill with diseases connected to the war, and some have supposed. Someone told me that 2/3 of Vietnam veterans have died, And it's a much larger proportion than the rest of the society, the rest of the men in the same age. And so, wars have huge consequences. I know you all know that. The other thing is, I could have put my hand up for protesting too, because when I came back from Vietnam, I got involved with the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. And one thing I hope Burns picked up was the Dewey Canyon 3, when Vietnam veterans marched on Washington. And threw our medals, when I was there, threw medals back. It was an extremely powerful time, because a lot of us felt like we didn't really belong in the non-military protest movement. It just didn't feel right to us, but it was very moving to be able to do that. And the other thing is, my wife, I told this story to my wife just a few weeks ago, and I completely kept it to myself. When I came back from Vietnam, I came back on an American Airlines flight that left from Cam Bay, and the hostesses were saints. I mean, we smelled like crap, I'm sure. I mean, no one came right off the field. You didn't have any way to launder, clean anything. And we landed in Honolulu for a rest stop or stopover, whatever, refueling. And people were in the airport with leis on, and they were celebrating weddings or celebrating vacations or whatever. And what I distinctly remember is we were completely ignored. No one said a word to us. No one said hello. No one said anything bad, but they just ignored us. And I still feel ignored. I feel like we're invisible. I feel like Vietnam veterans are still invisible. I have veteran plates on my truck. The only people who ever say anything to me are other veterans. And it hurts, quite frankly. It's very painful, because I was drafted. I've struggled with the idea of going to war. I never really wanted to go. I was going to go in the Peace Corps. I came from a family, long military history in my family. I just felt like I couldn't go again, their tradition. And, I think we've tried to make up, like people are constantly saying to me, oh, thank you for your service. And I don't quite know what to say to them, quite frankly. I feel like saying, well, I don't know. Okay, thanks. But, it's like, it's very frustrating, because I feel like, there's a sort of like people trying to make up for lost time or something. But I know that we are stuck in a quagmire in Afghanistan, and it's very painful to watch. The difference is we now have a mercenary army, and as much as I hated being drafted, I wish we had a draft. I wish everybody had to serve, and everybody had a responsibility. Everybody had skin in the game, because I think we'd fight a lot fewer wars.
Hello, my name is Bob Tortolani, and as has been mentioned, I'm a physician in the community, just recently retired. And I want to thank you all for being here, and also I want to thank those of you who were courageous enough to be protesters during that very difficult time. Protesting against the war, I think, was a very reasonable thing for us to express, those of you who felt that way. I wanted to say that, first of all, I'll tell you what I was doing over there. I had the honor of being a physician in an infantry battalion from September of 1968 through April of 1969. I was with the 1st Cav Division. And the last 4 months I was in a small emergency type of group with about 20 beds. And at that point I was taking, together with 3 other physicians, I was basically a triage unit for about 5,000 men. When people were injured, they were brought in by helicopter, and we were stabilizing them and triaging them, getting them to where they could get their best care. I wanted to say that I was struck, as was one of my friend here, by the Vietnamese soldiers saying that nobody wins in a war. It's all about destruction, and that can be more true. We just have to come up with other ways to solve human problems other than wars. It's got to be other ways. Somehow we've got to find negotiation. We've got to communicate with each other. The other thing I was struck with in this film that's been done so well is the time when the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, were coming back from the South injured, and the healthier, frightened new recruits were going south. I had that same experience, and it actually virtually brought tears to my eyes when I left on a plane after a year in Vietnam. I think most of us were pretty tired and haggard. And to see the fright in the eyes of the young people coming to replace us, it was fearful. It was scary, it was sad, and I still remember that to this day. The point I want to make about my role over there, as I said, it was an honor to be taking care of these people. I was basically a family physician, preventive medicine, teaching medics to do the best they could to keep us healthy, doing sick call, going from base to base on helicopter, seeing the people in the field. For those first 8 months, I got to know a lot of the people in that battalion. In the 8 months I was there, 90 out of the 900 were killed and about 400 injured. In other words, about a 50% casualty rate in my battalion. And among those who were killed, I knew many of them, and it was very hard after the first loss of a friend to get close after a while. But the amazing, I want to point out the fact that while a lot of the American soldiers were also against the war, they were doing their duty. They were there. They were doing the best they could. They were taking care of their brothers. They had everybody else's back. They did the best they could. They served their country, and I was proud to take care of them. I would just say that wars are just things to be avoided. It was awful to be in that war, but it was a great privilege to see the bravery and the way the American soldier dealt with a very difficult situation. So again, I thank you all for coming.
Well, watching that film for the past hour, it's hard to feel like I deserve to be up here speaking alongside these incredible human beings. And I know Eliza and I have done what we can as teenagers in a small town to raise a ruckus and make our voices heard about recent political issues. And I think coming away from all of this, all I can say is that all I can be is aware, and all I can do is speak to other people and spread the inspiration I'm feeling from the words that have just been spoken here to other young people, so that this is remembered and this is talked about and carried on generationally. Because it's amazing to see how many people did protest the war, and thinking about our current political situation is very frightening for me. And so it's inspiring in so many ways to see the number of people that did rise up and say no. And not only say no to what was happening, but bring their thoughts and minds together to create active solutions. So I just really want to thank you all for everything that you've done.
Yeah, obviously the bits in the film that talked about the student voice were very interesting to me. Lately I've been very, very interested in the power of the student voice and youth becoming empowered and speaking out. I took a lot away from this film in terms of just knowing, it sounds cliche at this point, but knowing that the only way to move forward and not repeat history is to look back and look at these things that have happened and try to really understand what happened. It really struck me at the beginning of the film how they were talking about how for a very long time people weren't trying to untangle it. People didn't want to look back and admit or try to see what had gone wrong. People didn't want to untangle the mistakes that had been made and the miscommunications and how it started on a base of miscommunication. And I know I personally have grown up with a lot of turmoil in the Middle East that I didn't really try to understand. I knew vaguely that it was negative and somehow our country was involved with it, and only recently have really been trying to understand what's going on. And so I think it's very important to always be looking for transparency, both in the past and in current events, really demanding the truth, and so that you can move forward in peacefulness and clarity. And yes, I want to thank you. I feel really grateful for this opportunity to have come and seen this and been with these people. Thank you. I have a lot of new ideas to move into the
Great.
a little bit.
All right, time for your questions, if you have any, for any of the panelists or all of the panelists. Hang on just a moment, the microphone will be there for you. Thank you.
So far, I'm pretty disappointed in everything I've seen on this film and the things that I've heard. From looking at the film, you get the impression from Ken Burns that 2 million Vietnamese were killed by us because some naval ship captain made up a story, had a hallucination, or did. Can that really be true? I doubt it. I think it's more likely that the South China Sea was loaded with oil, and we didn't want the Chinese to get it. We didn't want the Chinese to control Asia. We wanted a foothold there, like we wanted a foothold now in the Mideast through Israel. Ken does a great job of pulling at your heartstrings, of showing this side and that side, the good and the bad, but he never gets to the core of things. He will do a great documentary on civil rights and a great documentary on the Civil War, but he does not do a documentary on slavery. And it is much the same. He's more interested. The feeling from this film is war is terrible. Of course it's terrible. I am more interested in knowing why we get into wars, because we are into wars right now and we are destroying the world right now. That's one part of it. So I am a veteran. I was there right before Bob. I wasn't with the 1st Cav, but we were the next unit over. We were the 2nd Infantry in the 1st Division. So I was there in 10. And it was a very different experience from me, because I went into Vietnam eyes wide open. I understood what was going on in there. I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't shocked by what my country was doing. I knew what it was doing. It was terrible. And I got drafted against my will. But I did, and I went, and it was a great experience because of everything I saw and learned about my country. You learn about a country by looking at its wars, by looking at its prisons, by looking at its poor. And I got to see a lot about my country. So this is a good documentary. Ken Burns always does good documentaries. but never complete documentaries.
Thank you.
I think what you're saying is really interesting. One of my big fears, actually, with this documentary was that there'd be no history at all. And of course, we didn't see. The first slide goes up, it says 1845 through, obviously through through Dien Bien Phu and so on and so forth. The whole colonialization and imperial conquests by the French and the British in Asia. And I don't know how much he does, but and I don't really know how many episodes there are. There may be 18, but certainly the first 3, which we didn't see, are devoted to that. And I'm really interested to see what that's going to contain. I was afraid it was going to have nothing. I think your point about greed is incredibly important, but I don't think it's just greed of nations. I think it's greed of persons as well. I don't think we can forget our own individual motives as we move forward as a lens of understanding how nations move. If we look around us in our communities, who holds resources, how are they held, where is the real spirit of generosity and compassion in communities, we live in a nation now where the rich and the poor are more divided than ever. It's ridiculous. And that connects, obviously, to conditions that create wars like this. Whether or not Ken talks about that, I don't know, but I think you're right, that without a really deep historical look and understanding, we miss something important. So I'm really looking forward to seeing those first 3 episodes to see how far back it goes and what he has to say or document. So, interesting point.
Before we take the next question, I did contact Ken Burns' office and invite him to come here, but his schedule is so busy surrounding this that he could not. I also reached out to people I know in Vietnam, both the old north of the 17th parallel, North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and tried to see if somebody via Skype could be part of this panel, but the logistics didn't work out for that either, but I tried hard.
Thank you so much for trying that. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So, another question? Yeah.
Well, most of everything I was going to say was just said by the last speaker there about the historical background, because, in fact, my major complaint about at least the fragments of the film that we saw today was that it didn't help to understand anything. And I remember the teachings. I was a pretty active anti-war person at the time, and one of the most important messages of these teach-ins and these free university setups that we went to was to give us some historical background about why we were in this war, which most Americans had no idea. Vietnam used to be called French Indochina because it was a French colony. And the French, and as the film showed, the Vietnam War, in quotes, dates from 1945 to 1975. And between 1945 and 1962, it was a war between the French and the Vietnamese. It was a war of national liberation on the part of the Vietnamese from their French colonizers. Vietnam is a very Frenchified country in a lot of ways. Their major Western influence is French. And finally, the French gave up because it was just too costly for them to continue to control this country against the will of the people who lived there. Guess what? That's a pretty logical situation. And again, for reasons that my friend here referred to, the United States, seeing itself as the major world power after the Second World War, saw fit to defend the same interests that these colonial powers were trying to protect. And so we dove into Vietnam for all the reasons that we gave then and we still give for being in places like Afghanistan, which incidentally the Russians gave up on for similar reasons to the French having given up on. And the British, yes. So we're just the last to learn the fatal flaw of trying to dominate cultures which are less technologically and militarily apparently powerful. Anyway, I'm making a speech now, I don't mean to, but I think it's important to understand history and to demand to learn and to know about that history. And so I'm just so proud to see these young people here fighting for that kind of enlightenment and spreading the word. Thank you.
Some clarification while we get the microphone to the next speaker. The Vietnamese were a colony of the French until 1941, when German-occupied France ceased to exist. The Japanese went after Vietnam then. Japan lost in 1945. The French returned to Vietnam and were run out in May of 1954, the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. At that point, the Americans in 1955 began an aid package that ballooned to about 17,000 advisors under the Kennedy administration in 1962, and then the Tonkin Gulf incidents, one of which clearly, on both sides, agreement did not happen. An odd thing happened to me. I was teaching the Vietnam War, April vacation was coming, and I was teaching about the Tonkin Gulf incidents, and the students packed off and went to their Easter celebrations, and one of the girls came back. She'd gone to Pennsylvania for a family gathering, and every year they sit around the table and talk about what they're doing, and she discovered that her uncle was the commanding officer of the USS Turner Joy, the second of the two ships in the Tonkin Gulf, and he received the command to return fire, and he said, "At what? We're not being fired upon." And eventually it just became just fire, and so they fired at nothing. This according to the commanding officer of the USS Turner Joy via one of my students. Is there? Okay. Hi, Bill.
My name is Bill Fleming. I was there. As great as this movie was, it failed to show three of the biggest things of the Vietnam War. One, the war was fought in the whole country, not in the South. 80% of the movies you see and the closest you read is all about Saigon. The whole country was at war. The second is, they never showed American faith on how strong the soldier was trained. We were not sent there untrained. We were sent there to do a job as trained soldiers. And third, most important, is people had faith in going there. Not everyone was the U.S., not everyone cared, but a lot of people went because their country was real. They believed in their country. These are the points that people don't hear or see. They all hear about the war and who got shot up or what the dead was from one day to the next. But let's face it, if the war is real, American people fought for freedom. That's why we're there. We're fighting for freedom for the world. Thank you.
I don't know what's in the complete 18-hour program, but that's 60 minutes of an 18-hour program. I couldn't imagine how Ken Burns or anyone else could take an 18-hour film and delineate it to 60 minutes. So maybe there is in the complete, but we won't know that until next month. Anybody with a question for a panelist right over here, John? Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for speaking tonight. I really appreciate it. I've had the opportunity to live and work in southern Vietnam just this past year. And one of the more haunting things about going to a place like Saigon, or as far south as Can Tho especially, was running into American vets and University of Alabama t-shirts who look shattered. And I'm curious if any of you had the opportunity to return to Vietnam since the war, and if so, what that was like.
Tom and I have been back. Actually, we went back with our children in 2004, something, 2000. It's so startling to return to a country that you've known in a state of war, and then to see it in a condition of peace. I mean, it's just an amazing experience. I think I was really lucky, actually, because I was there very late in all of this, and we actually did see the end of the fighting. I saw the day at the university in Saigon when all the weapons were piled up, and everybody took off their uniforms and laid down their guns. It's an amazing experience. And it doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of hardship and struggle, just as there was here after the Revolutionary War. I mean, there's a lot of conflict and division in Vietnam as well, obviously. But 20 years later, 25, how many years later? Lots of years later, it was phenomenal. So many of the bomb craters had been filled in. There were buildings everywhere, whole buildings, not just blown up structures. Most of the country's young. All these young people, right? With no memory of the war. We had more in common with old people there who remembered the war than we did with the young tour guides we were with. We had no memory. They were concerned about freedom of the press and, you know, issues about education. And you're thinking, wait, what happened? So Vietnam, for the Vietnamese, you know, they're doing it. They're building their country, and it's exciting. We went back to the center, where years ago we had made arms and legs for kids and women and farmers. And it was so exciting to walk in there and to see a little mango tree that we'd planted, now huge, producing all this fruit. And for me, that was really the metaphor. We went to My Lai. We lived very near My Lai, and that's a place many of us have heard about. There's a museum there that talks about what happened there. But the whole surround is this beautiful village that's been rebuilt, very prosperous, fishing, you know, life going on, living. The rehab center where we worked has been moved to a larger city. Wonderfully, they now aren't just making legs for people who've stepped on mines, but for people who've been in car accidents. I mean, just normal stuff. And I mean, it sounds weird, but that was really exciting. It was wonderful. It was really healing. It was wonderful to go back and see that. At the same time, there are a lot of ongoing problems. I mean, you dump Agent Orange anywhere and it's going to make long-term environmental challenges. Many other issues, of course, issues with the same issues people here suffer from, with drug abuse, the effects of war, post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, our peoples are suffering from the same kinds of challenges. So if you ever get a chance to go, it's just gorgeous. It's a beautiful, beautiful, very productive country, just full of young energy. It's great.
Tom, you may have to turn that on.
Or a treat.
I was able to return with our family in 2000, and again with another group in 2006, which was looking at issues in Cambodia and Vietnam as to how they were caring for the addicted, for addiction, alcohol and other drugs. And so there's a commonality of our cultures today, And the people affected, of course, were all born since the war. And welcome to the 21st century. One of the folks I got to meet, we went throughout the country, but in Saigon I got to meet a former serviceman who had been in Vietnam, drafted and been there for, I think, he re-upped, so he was there for 2 or 3 years. He had come back in order to work in Can Tho in a school situation to, as he said, and I don't know his story, but he simply said, in some way to make up for his role in unhappy times there when he was a young man. And I simply mention that because I was impressed that people will take different steps in which to try to help, to try to mend situations which have been really very much torn apart. And I was very honored to meet him and to realize that there were a number of other people, such as himself, often silent. They wouldn't necessarily talk to other people, but they were there working in different service or teaching situations to try to complete their experience.
In the back, John? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, hang on just a minute.
Well, I just said, personally, I've been ambivalent about going back to Vietnam. I'm really thrilled that the country's doing so well, and that I thought it was, I thought it was actually a beautiful country. If you could, in spite of the terrible things happening in 1968 and 69, it was clearly a beautiful country, and those Vietnamese people you've met were nice people just like the rest of us. We're all God's children. We're all just in this together, We're all human beings, and again, I think the mention was made by Tom of personal healing. I think that I'm as anxious for personal healing as I am for our nation's healing. I think that we need to continue, and hopefully this the dialogue that we produce by this film will help our country to continue the healing process, because this was the war of our generation. We made a lot of mistakes. I was just thinking, just bouncing from one thought to another, but on my way to Vietnam, I read a book called The Vietnamese Village, and it talked all about the culture of the Vietnamese people. I was just 26. I was as interested in the culture of the people going to this country. And it was very clear how much they cared about their family, about their village, about the tombstones who were in their village. They didn't want to leave from their village. And then when you heard that they were doing these strategic hamlets and taking people away from their homes, I mean, I don't think anybody read that book. Or if they read it, they could have cared less about it. But that book was really well done, and you really had a good feeling for the Vietnamese people and how they should be treated with dignity and treated the way people need to be treated if you're going to go into their country. And you didn't win the hearts and minds, unfortunately, by taking people away from their gravestones, I mean, that kind of thing. Now, the final thing I want to say is, I don't want to talk too long, but I think in terms of the healing, when I came home, I was told, Bob, you better take your uniform off, because you probably are not going to be treated very well. I think a comment was made about being ignored. Unfortunately, some of my friends, I never suffered from any indignities. I did keep my uniform on, but I know other people who were treated very poorly, and I think there was always, I think that as a protester or as a combat veteran, we're all the same, we want peace, we want to avoid ourselves and our families being hurt, and we're all in this together, and I think whether we protest or whether we fight, whatever we do, I think we have to treat each other with respect. And I think there are 19.2 million veterans in this country. Please treat veterans very well. They need to be treated well. They've been through a lot, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq or Vietnam or World War II. Veterans are special people. They need to get special consideration, and they need to be treated with dignity at all times. Thank you.
We have time for just two more questions or comments. Number
Okay.
one. Yeah.
My name is Drew. I live in Vietnam from August 68 to August 69. I was an Army helicopter pilot, so I had somewhat different perspective on the war. My whole reason for being is to help the troops on the ground. Whatever they needed, myself and my fellow aviators were there to do. And what frustrated us the most was the government focus on body count. That was the way they gauged the war with body count. That meant sending these people out on missions, getting them wounded, killed, to see how many enemy they could kill. Then they would be withdrawn back to their base. The enemy would come back in again. A couple of months later, oh, we need to go out to that area because it's bad guys again. So they'd send them back out. So that was what was most frustrating for me in that situation. And in saying that, I have always been very, very proud of what I did in spite of all the things that people say about Vietnam. I was very, very proud of what I did because of all the people, children, grandchildren walking around today because of what people like me did over there.
I didn't see anyone first. Maybe try to get them all. Well, if you could be brief, let's go here in the front first.
I just have a plug about a book that was written by, I believe, the first person who spoke in this wonderful preview by Ken Burns. And by the way, I disagree with the earlier comment about Ken Burns. I think he does a terrific job, richer than mine. At any rate, the first person who spoke in this preview tonight is an author by the name of Ken Burns, who some of you I'm sure are familiar with. He wrote a wonderful book, I shouldn't say wonderful. He wrote a very powerful, extremely disturbing book entitled Matterhorn. I found out about this book because I'm a Vietnam vet, and a close friend of mine who I first met in Marine Corps RCS in 1968 had the misfortune of going to Vietnam in I Corps just south of the DMZ, and he was a second lieutenant infantry platoon commander in the Marine Corps, and learned very quickly, this friend of mine, that really his most important job there was to try and save the lives of these poor kids who were under his command. And this guy, this friend of mine recommended this book by Latchis because he said, this is exactly what it was like. This guy, Latchis, was there at the same time. He was doing the same job, an infantry platoon commander in the Marine Corps, and he has tremendous credentials. He went to Yale. He was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. He was this infantry platoon commander in the Marine Corps, for which he received 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, 10 Air Medals, and the Navy Cross. The Navy Cross is one level below the Medal of Honor. And this book is a nightmare. I was fortunate, I got orders in country to Vietnam to my sister squadron, but at the last minute, my orders were modified. But this close friend of mine was there in that quagmire, in that nightmare, trying to keep his kids alive. And this fellow Latchis does a fabulous job in this book. His second book is also valuable because it's basically a message to the politicians, to these leaders that we elect. He says, listen, when you decide to go to war, this is what happens to these young kids. You better think twice, 3 times, and 4 times before you ever do that again. And one of the most depressing things to me and many of my vet friends was when we made the mistake of going to war in Iraq, having already experienced the Vietnam War. I would have thought the one thing we could have learned from that war was to never do that again. I also just want to say that Ken Burns, I think, shows respect for Americans, so just from this preview, shows respect for the American soldier, for the Vietnamese soldier, for the civilians on both sides, to those who were courageous enough to protest the war. I think he's going to do a great job.
Way in the back, I think it was, do you still have one in the way in the back? Or? Yeah, his hand was.
Thank you very much. How can our experience here help us inform us in the ongoing thing with North Korea at your North? Yeah. Any ideas?
Are you asking us up here? Well, good Lord. I mean, we have a petulant draft dodger for a president, and I'm sorry, you know, maybe someone voted for him here, and I'm sorry for that, but whatever. I mean, as a veteran, I mean, I grew up in a middle-class family, and you know, I could have gotten out of the war. I probably could have if I'd chosen to. But you know, we need leaders who are experienced and know something about war and know something about conflict. And that's the scariest part. Is that I don't know. I mean, you know, North Korea is obviously run by a fool. I mean, a petulant fool himself. And it's a country that's been through horrible hardship. People are taken advantage of, and they're scared because we have huge military assets in that particular part of the country, of the world. And you know, I guess I think of Teddy Roosevelt, who said, you know, walk softly and carry a big stick, and that's all I can say. I mean, you approach a terrified animal or a terrified person carefully, not in a big bully-like way. And I don't know how to. I mean, that's the only thing I can say of myself. And again, it's why I think we need a universal service in this country where everybody has skin in the game. Every young person, these young women over here, you know, that helps them pay attention. All of us to pay attention, our families, to what's going on in the world. And a lot of Americans just say, well, I'm just going to the mall and I'm going to hang out because I'm not bothered by these wars, or the potential of these wars. And that's another issue. I'm going to shut up because I'll say something stupid.
Last one, John. Thank you.
I'm going to ask no pictures, please. Thank you. It's to protect the privacy of someone I care very much about. I wanted to talk about things that got my attention about the Vietnam War. One was marching in Washington with 1 million people, all singing "Give Peace a Chance." It was amazing. I can't begin to describe the power of that many people. One voice. And I was in New York City in the 60s and was part of the arts program at Judson Church in Washington Square. And every time I went in that building, there was a placard outside, and it would tell not what the hymns were going to be that day or whatever. It told the body count. And it wasn't just the American body count, it was the Vietnamese body count. And every time I went in the building, I saw those numbers go up. But what I wanted especially to say was that my son-in-law came home from Vietnam. He was not then my son-in-law. And he had an anger problem. He had a big anger problem. And he went through a number of marriages and eventually married my daughter. It was the best marriage I have ever seen. I don't mean wedding, I mean marriage. They both worked very hard, and he was a contributor to many causes and many good works, and I had tremendous respect for him. And one day, he went to a new doctor, and the doctor said, "Gee, I'd like to do some blood tests." And they came back 26 years after he left Vietnam. It came back positive for hepatitis C. He was a medic. They had access to needles and drugs. He was not a druggy kind of a person, but the conditions there were so horrific that the soldiers were sharing needles, and he got hep C. And the doctor said, "Well, we'll put you on this particular cocktail of drugs." And he was on it for several years, and he went back to the doctor and was tested again and told, "Well, it's, you can't find any of the hepatitis C anymore. You're not going to die of that, but you might die of cancer." 11 years later, he died of cancer with an 11-year-old daughter. And the grief of that family breaks my heart. And I know that's just one person's story, but he is as much somebody who died because of Vietnam War as people who died in combat. His name will never be on the big black memorial. But it's like when you drop a stone in a pond, the ripples go out and out and out. And when you drop a bomb, it goes out and out and out. It's like there's no end. What was his name? I don't want to say that because of the privacy of my daughter and her family. I would be glad to tell you in person.
John Potter, this wonderful facility, the Latchis Theater.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for hosting us tonight. Thank you, Vermont PBS, for bringing this event to us. And the panelists, swallow your humility. You were magnificent tonight, all of you. Thank you all for coming and your participation. Thank you very much. Thank you.